to bring your practice into every single aspect of your life.
When we come to our practices with a sense of sincerity, coming into your practice with a sense of self-empowerment, I think is also very important.
It's not about how many books you have out or how many followers you have. You know, we all have the same value. We're all part of the same stuff.
You're not just healing that present situation, you're working through it in your past and your future. Your medicine could be someone else's poison, and their poison can be your medicine.
Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to be talking about magical defense and the witch's warfare. I'm your host, Christian, aka the Atlantean Alchemist, with
Viv, aka Lunar Faery Witch.
Alright guys, so let's start talking about the differences between hexes, curses, and jinxes. What's your definition between the three?
So different practitioners would probably categorize these slightly differently, but the way I like to think about hexes, curses, and jinxes is that they kind of vary in level. So jinxes would be the least severe and curses would be the most severe. So a jinx might be, you know, you get someone to stub their toe every morning for a week, or you give someone a flat tire, or small annoyances or hassles kind of increase in their life. A hex might be something not as intense as a curse, but more intense than a jinx. So maybe someone gets injured or something bad happens to them, but it's not to the point where it's like destroying their life. It's just something that's making it a little bit difficult for them. And, you know, maybe they have a little miserable month or something. And then a curse would be the most intense, but curses could also vary in intensity. So, you know, it could be placing a sickness on someone. That could be a curse, or all the way up to death curses, which I've known a couple of people who have had death curses put on them, and those will kind of just drain you and make you sick and sap your energy and until, you know, the desired outcome of the practitioner, which, you know, we're not here to debate the morality or talk about that quite yet. You know, I'm just sort of trying to categorize these and put them into perspective. But I would say that's how I'd categorize jinxes, hexes, and curses personally.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And before we start talking about this, I didn't really defer jinxes and hexes. To me, a hex was just something minute, like someone kind of putting the evil eye on you, or having your tire pop, or you stub your toe, something like that, versus a curse, which would be more long-term, varying and ranging, as you said, in intensity. So it's interesting to look at the names, and I think there may be even more to look at with the etymology of the words behind them. I did also want to go into talking about baneful plants. A few that I have worked with that have worked wonders for me is roses. Roses, because they're so dualistic, especially with the thorns. Roses can be used to bring heartbreak, unrequited love, betrayal. It has a lot to do with the imagery of the plant that you're using, or it could even be crystal that you're using. When you think about the properties and kind of like the imagery that comes to mind, like when you think of roses, they're going to be most dramas, most dramatic outcomes, and each rose color has a different meaning. That's how I would work with roses and their thorns. The thorns can also be used for defensive measures. I personally like to use thorns with the energy of the rune Thurisaz. So this would be more for like banishing or casting out with a sort of more harsher and more hostile energy. So that would be more like kicking out a very rude neighbor or what have you, kind of setting up the scene for them to leave. So that's a little bit more of a forceful, more dynamic piece. There's things like working with garlic, cayenne pepper, chili powder. Those are other things that I've used personally. Spicy things have a really good tendency to be used for baneful magic, and they're also really good if you're using that for like to bring someone impotency, like curses, so that those that experience it will go through the symptoms of not being able to function in sexual performance. What about you, Viv?
So I love thorny plants, both for baneful workings and protection, because, you mentioned the rose having a dualistic nature, and I think all thorny plants have this dualistic nature where they can be used to harm, but they can also be used to protect against harm. Same as a weapon, I suppose. So thistle that grows in my area, rose thorns, you mentioned roses as well. I love roses because they're so versatile, but the thorny parts of the plant are wonderful. You can even use just the thorns, just be careful like breaking them off, in place of nails or pins if they're sharp enough and large enough. So I enjoy that. I love using peppers. I have a whole box of peppers in my room. It's not a large box. It's kind of a smallish box, but I do have a whole box of dried hot peppers in my room, mainly for baneful workings. Although occasionally I'll take them down to the kitchen, but mainly for baneful workings. Anything sour to sour situation, like vinegar, lemons. I know there's a whole meme with the TikTok lemon spell. We're not doing lemon BDSM, but they are very good for souring a situation, and maybe that type of thing, or souring someone's circumstances. Same with vinegar. Same, even I haven't used citric acid before because it's sort of a powdery, crystally consistency like salt, but that is very sour as well. So I suppose you could use that in some kind of powder if you wanted to. And ground up hot pepper, hot sauce. Hot sauce is wonderful for baneful workings. You can put it on a picture of someone as part of a working. You could, just add it for that kick, that spice. Just get the hottest sauce you have, and that's something I really like to use as well. And that's about it for baneful plants. Now, I am reading a very interesting book called The Poison Path Herbal, and it talks about poisonous plants that are used in baneful workings. But of course, with that, don't read like one book on poisonous plants and start using them, because that's not a good idea. I am going to do probably a couple of years at least of research into these before I even touch them. But they do have a lot of historical use, as in poisoning, in political poisonings and assassinations, and also within magic, and the associations of plants like henbane and belladonna with witches. So fascinating to learn about that as well.
Yeah, and I don't know why I've always been really drawn to belladonna. Like, not even just as like for baneful work, like it's often an ingredient used in bombs for like flying ointment, for example. That and like wormwood, which are both poisonous but really get you very spiritually conscious and aware of the subtle realms. I do wonder though how they go through the process of making it safe for the skin. I've always been curious about that, but that's for more research for my own personal leisure. I find an affinity for belladonna, I think, with the plant spirit itself. And I did also want to discuss a little bit about the types of curses. So to give you guys background for different types of protection that you can use. So curses can come in many ways. Usually they're going to be targeted directly to you and not towards someone else in your care. That they can, and that may be really shitty. So you always want to protect against that as well. That's why limiting information of what other people can gather is very important. So on social media, maybe you don't want to share certain family members, things like that on your feed, just to keep your home and those that are not involved in your craft safe. With yourself, however, there's many different ways that they can impact you. This could be emotional, where they bring up your inner demons, all the shadow work you probably have avoided, and bring it all to the surface in the most chaotic way possible. That's where you're kind of forced in a corner, in a position where you're kind of your worst enemy. They can do that to you. Your mind, they can, besides manipulation tactics of like changing your thoughts or your feelings, they can do things like negatively influence your habits, so they can get you into periods of obsession and compulsion that are really hard to get out of, and can even lead you to passive addiction. So those are some ways that they can affect you both mentally and emotionally. And then as well physically, like Viv mentioned, with matters of like health and sickness. And then they even can go to the soul or the spirit, where there's more psychic vampirism, and there's even more crazy kinds of curses where they could like partially trap your spirit in special entrapment seals and bottles, and do all kinds of workings with you in that manner. And that could also be used as a means of healing as well, if you're going to do the counteractive for yourself. But these are just to give you some ideas of like the many facets of yourself. You have to think outside the box of what someone is capable of, so you know how to protect yourself. So going into the protections, some very basic protections. My recommendation is to always have at least 3 personal protections with you at all times, especially when you leave the house. And then within your home should be a fortress, especially the room that you inhabit the most, and especially at night, because this is where, you know, we're not just worried about people at this point, we're worried also about spirits. Sometimes spirits find that they don't like us at all, like just being aware of our existence. So like, to give, I guess, a more personal example, this happened to me actually quite recently, maybe a couple weeks ago, of dealing with this spirit that I faced back when I was 16, and it came around again after being banished, and it just has a personal vendetta to the kind of person that I am. Some of the ways that I had to learn how to protect myself is by learning how to protect myself from negative influences, bolster my wards and protections, know what allies I can turn to. And usually the best way to handle a spirit like that is to go to the higher ups of that spirit. So, you know, there's always some sort of hierarchy going on in the spirit world. So it's best to appeal to one who is higher to that individual, who can see your point of view, to get them to cease. What has been your experiences with like working through any kinds of things that, like maybe issues with protections or anything that's kind of come your way?
So first of all, I kind of wanted to touch on, because you did touch on a lot, like signs of being hexed or cursed. Definitely also, I don't know if you mentioned this actually, but definitely pay attention to your dreams, because you might start getting nightmares that you have when you normally don't get nightmares. You might even have that person appear in your dream. So, you know, if you start getting abnormal dreams, or if you're someone who doesn't really remember your dreams and you suddenly wake up with nightmares, write everything down, and you might even see that person or intuitively know who that is that's doing that to you. Especially if you know someone who maybe has disclosed to you that they specialize in dream walking or anything like that, or you know another practitioner and you suddenly have a fallout with another practitioner, and then all of a sudden, like a day or two after, you start getting these nightmares. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to your dreams. And with the sickness thing, curses can definitely make you sick. Obviously, I always advocate for both conventional, like, medicine, so going to the doctor, figuring that out, because they can make you physically ill, and you do need a doctor for that. It's not just spiritual, but also spiritually cleanse and look into that and what might be going on. If the sickness is combined with other symptoms that Christian and I have already talked about. As for protection, I definitely, you mentioned, you know, spirits might have a personal vendetta against you, and I definitely agree. And I do think that we don't emphasize that as much, because to be honest, in my experience along my path, I haven't needed protection from hexes and curses as much as I have against either, the evil eye and unintentional negative energy sent towards me, and spirits, certain types of spirits, or not types, but certain spirits. You might get hexed or cursed or whatever. Probably not cursed, most likely hexed at some point especially if you engage with a lot of magical practitioners, and drama and fallouts are likely to happen, but they're much less common, I think, than people think. And so I think we do need to emphasize more protecting against stuff like the evil eye, negative energy sent from other people as well as spirits. So I want to start with the evil eye and negative energy unintentionally sent by other people. What part of my practice in the mornings is meditation, just my spiritual practice, morning practice, right? And part of that is a shielding meditation. And I'm sure a lot of you know what shielding is already, but just in case you don't, you're sort of visualizing a shield or a bubble or something that's all around you that's protecting your energy from outside negativity. And different people have different visualizations they like to do. If you work a lot with the element of water, maybe it'll be like a bubble of ice or something along those lines. Maybe it's just made of light, and it's like a semi-permeable barrier that you're visualizing, where it, maybe sends back negative energy to the sender, but absorbs in the energies you want to keep or you want to absorb. Maybe you imagine like thorny brambles growing all around you, or just thorns and kind of, expanding all around you. And then on the inside, you've got that, you're keeping that energy that you want to keep around and within you, but it's keeping that negative energy out, if that makes sense. Shielding meditations every morning are great, and just keep in mind that they do break down throughout the course of the day. So what I do is, especially when I'm at work, because this is when I need them the most, because I'm interacting with a lot of people, there's high stress situations, it's a stressful environment, is that sometimes I'll go to the bathroom, and if I feel that my shield that I visualized is breaking down, or I don't feel as protected, I'll sit down and I'll do a quick meditation in the bathroom, and I'll visualize it coming back up and strengthening that shield. Now, I haven't quite figured out how to effectively create something that it can feed on so it doesn't break down, but if I do, I'll probably mention it in a future episode or make a video about it in my success with it. The other thing is protecting your home, because a lot of people will come into your home and unintentionally leave their baggage there, or just negative energies, and also spirits as well. We're going into spirits now. Protecting your home, or like Christian said, the space you're in the most, is really important. One thing I like to do is I like to place garlic cloves around the outside four corners of the perimeter around my home. You could even plant these, but I know if you have a driveway in front of your house, you're probably not going to be able to do that. So you can totally just place them, just throw them out there. It doesn't matter, because garlic is great for protection. You can make a protection powder with protective herbs, and whatever you have. Eggshell powder is great too, and sprinkle it around your home on the outside if you want to do that, at your doorstep. Stuff like that is really great. Home protection is really important when it comes to creating wards against spirits that don't have the best intentions for you. And I also find that working with specific deities or spirits has really helped me stay protected. Specifically, Belial and Hecate. They're both very protective. I mean, Hecate, during ancient times, they'd actually set up shrines for her for protection against wandering spirits or spirits that meant you harm, because she has dominion over spirits, over the spirit realm. So, working with Hecate personally has, and Belial as well, who tends to be, in my UPG, my experience, very protective over those who work with him, who are like his children, really. He has that very protective energy, and he will, if you respect him, if you become close to him spiritually, he will be very protective, at least in my experience. So definitely those types of beings can can aid you a lot with your protection magic and with staying protected spiritually.
Yeah, I'm the same way with King Belial. King Belial is very much like I always describe him as like a mafia boss. Like very like if you're of his people, he will defend you with all his resources. And if you got a vendetta against one of his people, you're sleeping with the fishes. That's very much his personality. I did want to touch on the orc shielding. So I've done pretty well with orc shielding to get it lasting longer through experimentation. I haven't figured out a way for it to last forever, but I figured out how to lengthen it. Some ways that I've worked with orc shielding is that you program it into the orc shield. You'll have several layers that do different functions. So you'll have an outer layer that's more for like purifying or transmuting. And then your inner layers are going to be harder and denser as they're closer to your body. And you're going to set it up that they're all interlinked and that they are self-regenerating and they're semi-permeable. So they'll take in everything that's concordant with you and repel everything that's discordant with you. And then you're going to link it to one of your patron spirits or gods or whoever you feel the strongest connection to. You're going to ask them to direct their energy and maintain these protections. Doing all that, I've gotten it to last about maybe 3 days, but I haven't been able to get it to last longer than that. I assume that if you put in the time and the energy more into it, like even if it's just reaffirming with your gods or the spirits that you work with, you can further fortify it and keep it going even longer. But I've gotten it only about 3 days. I notice when you're a lot more stressful, a lot more imbalanced within yourself, your wards, your personal protections also waver. So it's important to be centered in your inner peace in the face of chaos that it's able to sustain and stabilize just like your own energy. That's what helps me with orc shielding. I like to separate them by the elements, and I also like to use violet fire and flame. That's helped me a lot. Going into protective herbs, things that I really, really love. I stand by valerian so much. I have such a strong bond with valerian. Valerian root, like sleep time, because your nighttime is your most vulnerable time. So to work with that herb is very powerful at night. I like anse seed, and I also really like juniper and your spices. So using things like cinnamon, actually anything that's sort of like has that spicy kick to it can be very protective. And when we think about what cinnamon actually is, even though we associate it with passion, it is tree bark, essentially. It is the protective outer layer of a tree. So symbolically, it is also a protective layer for you as well. Crystals that I really love for protection are black tourmaline. Azurine is really good as well. It sort of acts as black tourmaline, except it's more like the antisocial stone. So if you need more periods of introspection and you need to kind of keep people out from calling you and constantly contacting you, get yourself some azurine. Other ones are petalite, where if you want some more sort of like a lighter, more uplifting protection, that one's a lot more associated with connection to angels. And then there is another personal favorite of mine is jet. Jet and amber are my favorite for against psychic vampirism or taking on the energies of other people. So it helps me retain my own personal energy. I wear jet all the time, so I'm not giving my energy and power away. And at the end of the day, I always call all of my energy back and send whatever residue back to whence it came. But I don't really carry a lot of other people's energy because of wearing jet. So it's helped me tremendously. And for warding, I did also want to cover that. So one method I actually, despite TikTok's many mishaps, I actually learn a few things here and there from a few content creators. So one is coming up with finding the blueprint of your house or of your apartment or your home and using the layout, the blueprint of your location, creating sigils and wards on that blueprint. Instead of placing sigils throughout the house, especially in areas that maybe you live with family and it's uncharted territory, you don't want to put magic symbols in their space, you can actually do this by writing it out on the blueprint and having that be the symbolic representation of all the protections you want surrounding the encompassing area. And you can even do a crystal grid on top of that, just for protection, or sort of kind of like a charm almost of like the entire gridding of your home in your own space. So it's a really, really cool technique. Another one that I've used as well is to create a servitor that is in charge of your protections and wards. Servitors do require a lot of maintenance and a lot of attention. So be creative with how you want to measure the creativity and the fluidity of this being, because they need to be highly intelligent and really connected to you to know how to protect you best. Otherwise, it's going to require a lot of energy and communication. And there's many other methods out there, but you also want to especially ward your dreams. Don't leave out yourself in your spiritual travels when you're asleep, because even though your space may be a fortress, when your soul is out of that space, you could be targeted in your sleep and dreams. Anything else to add on to that, Viv? Or did you want to go into talking about breaking curses and hexes?
Really liked that thing you brought up with the blueprint of the home. I think that's a really cool idea, really good piece of sympathetic magic. I think that's actually very valuable. I like that. And as for, I wanted to go over some protection herbs I like. I know you mentioned juniper. I love juniper. It grows so much in abundance where I live. It's literally everywhere. Juniper is like all over the place. I couldn't run out of juniper living here if I tried. So love juniper. Great protection herb. You can use the berries. You can use the plant matter itself, or both. It's really great. Spices, like Christian said, especially cloves. I love cloves, cinnamon. Yeah, cloves are great. I love putting whole cloves in my protection spell work, my workings. I wear the Nazar sometimes. Most of the time I forget, but sometimes I do. I did grow up with that as part of my culture, and it's great for protecting against the evil eye. And despite what TikTok kids will tell you, and just kids on the internet in general, it is not a closed practice. A similar symbol protecting against the evil eye occurs like all over the world, so don't worry too much about it. You can wear it. Sincerely, a Turkish person. It's not closed. Don't worry about it. And what other plants? I'm trying to think of other plants, because I knew I was thinking of plants as Christian was talking, because he said juniper, and I was like, okay, I got to think of plants. I did mention thorny plants like thistle and rose earlier, so that angelica root is wonderful for protection. And there's a lot of really interesting lore behind it. It's been associated with angels and spirits of the higher realms for a very long time. And if you don't work with angels, that doesn't mean you can't work with angelica. It's just an interesting little tidbit there. Yeah, I mean, those are the main protection herbs that I like. And, for stones, I do work a little bit with black tourmaline and obsidian. I think selenite is good for protecting your dreams. I used smoky quartz as well in a charm bag for dream protection. It worked really well for me as well. And for breaking curses, for breaking hexes, baneful magic, it's going to depend on the severity. Some of them, you could break them with just some intense cleansing of the self. One of the things that is very helpful is like an uncrossing bath. So it would be a bath, like a deep cleansing bath that you would do for a specific amount of days in a row. And the days will vary depending on your tradition or your intuition. I tend to go intuitively by what days. I'll just know how many days I would need to do this for, or someone asking me for help would need to do this for. I have noticed, though, that they tend to be odd numbers. It tends to be 7 days or 9 days or 3 days. I haven't really seen anything saying do an uncrossing bath for 2 days or 6 days. I don't know why. I'm going to probably look into the numerology of that, or just the reasoning behind that, but I have noticed that. So you'll put in a bunch of herbs. You don't have to put in a bunch of herbs, but you can add herbs for cleansing, for banishment, for exorcism. Christian mentioned wormwood earlier, and wormwood is actually a good plant for exorcism, but don't drink the tea. It's mildly psychoactive, but it's also disgustingly bitter, and it will make you disgusted. So don't do that. I would recommend not drinking any kind of wormwood or eating it or anything like that. But wormwood is good for exorcism and banishing and cleansing. You can use sage, and I don't use white sage for ethical purposes, but there's hundreds of species of sage you can use. You do not have to use this one species of sage. I find juniper is good for cleansing too. And its main function is protection, but it can be cleansing. And you can just add all these herbs that you want. You can add Florida water. Florida water is wonderful for cleansing. I think it's a great thing to have in your spiritual arsenal of tools. You can either buy it or you can make it yourself by infusing cleansing herbs in alcohol for a few days in a dark place. Shake it every now and then for a couple weeks and you should have Florida water. And you can add essential oils to it if you'd like. If you're dealing with a very unruly spirit, though, you're probably going to have to really buckle down and not only get it out of your home, but you're going to have to do some strong protections. Do you have anything to add, Christian? Because I just kind of spent like 10 minutes talking about baths.
Yeah, of course. When it comes to breaking curses and hexes, like Viv mentioned, we want to start off with purification, the purification of ourselves, not just physical cleanliness, but the cleanliness of our spirit, body, mind, and heart. So essentially, it's the removal of all those things and kind of refining your energy to kind of come back to a neutral state. Then you want to elevate your state. So first, besides uncrossing, which I really like, I also really like the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, LBRP for short. That ritual works really well for me to kind of both clear myself and banish out the energy of the space. So it's kind of like spiritual bleach. It clears out the energy of your space and yourself. I like to do that rather after cursing and doing any kind of baneful magic, because you need to do a lot of purification of yourself after doing something like that. But you also want to do it if you're affected. And if you are affected and it's something more long-lasting and intense, you want to do it consistently. Another thing is I like to do road opening rituals. So opening doors to success and prosperity and elevation of your spirit is really important as well after coming to a neutral, cleansed state. Because the further your own spirit is fortified, the more resistance you have against curses. And this is something I also like to talk about, is the concept of blessings. You could ask for a blessing from your deities, from your spirits, to gain resistance against certain types of magic. And this is something you should always do afterwards if you've identified the current that you're being faced with. Besides the common theme of sending return to sender, I honestly don't like the idea of return to sender anymore, because I feel like everyone does it. So people know how to work against that. You have to think outside the box when it comes to both your liberation from those energies as well as working the baneful arts. The more creative you are, the more it's going to help you. And if you work in layers and do small things over time, most things can be cleared pretty much through purification and banishment. Other times you will have to ask for spiritual assistance, especially when it's something very ingrained in you, like a binding. That takes more effort to release. I did talk about this with the concept of using knot magic, but instead of creating knots, you're unwinding knots, and that being the representation of the release of those binds that are placed upon you. And those binds can be the curse that is afflicted upon you. And then the breaking of, for example, like a death curse or something like that, you would have to turn to spirits that exalt life and the beauty of life. So for me, that could be like Freya. For someone else, that may be Persephone, because even though she has her underworldly aspect as Kore, the goddess of spring, she's about the elevation and the growth of new life. To meet her, it doesn't necessarily have to be a god or goddess. It could be a spirit, but you want someone that emphasizes the resurgence of life, and that is the spirit that you want to connect with to overcome something like a death curse, or someone who is exalted as a healer like Archangel Raphael, President Pure, who both know the workings of sickness and its reversing. So that's very helpful to turn to spiritual assistance when it's something that has been worked upon you that is something more heavy. And some people can intend for things to be like an eternal curse or something like that, or curses on lineages. That occurs a lot as well. Those things can be reworked. You're not in a position where you're stuck with a fate that isn't of your own choosing. You could always work around it. There's even arts, magical arts that are based around you weaving your fate and your destiny, and you can overcome those things that are considered eternal. So never feel like you don't have options. There's always, for every great power, there's always an opposite and equal power to go and counteract it. It's just a matter of your mental resourcefulness and your creativity. As long as you have that, you can overcome any kind of curse or any affliction that is placed upon you, both intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that you emphasize thinking outside of the box, because that's definitely something that's needed in these situations when it comes to what some people might call quote unquote magical warfare. Just like with any battle, thinking outside the box is important, and it's going to help get you out of that situation as quickly as possible. Honestly, I think, Christian, the way you explained breaking curses, I don't think I have anything to add to that. That was really good. I did add my whole spiel about baths. Baths are cool. I like baths. But I think you pretty much covered everything.
My book will be out in 2022. I'll be taking names and I'll be writing down my signature for you all. But
you should.
In all seriousness, like Viv said, practice and being someone who wants to put themselves out there more in the community, I also think of my experiences with spirits, and I think that's usually what happens more than anything else, because when you're elevated as a person and you're connected to and associated with very strong powers, there are other powers that are opposite to those that see you at your best, and they don't want you to succeed because they want whatever pushing their agenda or whatever the case is. So it's important to affirm to yourself and fortify your spirit at all times. Things that fortify your spirit are that uplift you, that bring you joy. It could even be chanting, because to me, chanting is very powerful for fortifying the spirit, especially like chanting the rune Algis, which to me is a rune of spiritual fortification. It helps a lot. And there's books like from Jason Miller, The Sorcerer's Secret, that has really helped me come up with some concepts and ideas of like daily ways of strengthening your spirit to have greater protection and just further affirm your practice each day in a way that strengthens your mana, strengthens your life force and the energy that you put into your work. But that's all that I have, guys. Thank you guys so much for listening in. Do you have any last words for us, Viv?
I definitely agree with the idea of fortifying your spirit. I think generally we need to all take care of ourselves. If you find yourself starting to become a workaholic or, just neglecting your own mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being, you're much more susceptible to things happening, whether that's stress, therefore causing sickness, which is a both mental and physical thing, or spiritual attacks, because it's going to be a lot easier for, the evil eye or for certain things that happen to get to you when you're in that state. So like Christian said, fortify your spirit, go on walks in nature, do whatever grounds you, take time out for yourself each day, even if it's just to breathe. I think that's really, really, really important to not only staying sane, but just protecting yourself, because self-care is really important. No matter how much we say this is only about service to others, service to others is great. It's been a big part of magical practice for hundreds and hundreds of years, but ultimately you can't pour out of an empty cup, and you can't just neglect yourself in the name of service. So you are just as important as anyone else that you're wanting to help out there. And, stay protected. Wear your protection charms, up your protections. Don't forget to do them, because as a magical practitioner, you're going to attract more spirits. Because of what you're doing, you're going to attract more of these things. So it's important to keep that in mind and to do your best to stay protected. Good books on protection and Reversal Magic by Jason Miller. You could also read Psychic Self-Defense by Diane Fortune, and just keep in mind that she is an occultist from the 20th century, so that will be reflected in her writing. Still great books from that era. And The Witch's Shield by Christopher Penczak. So if you're interested in learning more about protection, also I'd recommend reading about curses, hexes, and baneful magic in general, even if you don't do that kind of stuff, so that you can better learn how to do protection. So there's Utterly Wicked by Dorothy Morrison, and there's also a book by S. Connolly called Curses, Hexes, and Crossing. So read up on these things, learn about these things, learn from other practitioners. Even if you don't do baneful magic, learn about it anyway. And yeah, that's my spiel. Thank you for watching, or not watching, for listening. I hope you all enjoyed this episode, and I will see you all next time.